So Locke believes that the state of nature has a law of nature to govern it. And the fundamental principle of that law is that every one of us knows its fundamental principle, which is that you ought not to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Now that's a law. I mean, that is, we all, being reasonable creatures, being rational creatures, supposedly recognize the authority of that principle over us. So the state of nature is not a state of war. Right? He's very clear about that. The state of nature is not a state of war. The Hobbes is wrong, and one can see what the basis of the difference is. Hobbes would not regard us as being rational creatures in the same way that Locke does. Locke believes that just by virtue of being reasonable creatures, being rational, that we also recognize that there is a certain moral law that has authority over us. I don't think that Hobbes believes in any such thing. So I don't know who's right, but that's a big difference. So there's a law of nature to govern the state of nature. And interestingly enough, Locke believes that every one of us has the right to enforce that law. As he says in section 7 here, and that all men may be restrained from invading others' rights and from doing hurt to one another, and the law of nature be observed, which willeth the peace and preservation of all mankind. The execution of the law of nature is, in that state, put into every man's hands, whereby everyone has a right to punish the transgressors of that law, to such a degree as may hinder its violation. For the law of nature would, as all other laws that concern men in this world, be in vain if there were nobody that in the state of nature had a power to execute that law. So, a very different picture of the state of nature. There's a law of nature that governs it, and every individual is tasked with the role or the work of actually enforcing it. That is, if I'm in the state of nature, that is, I'm living around other people, but there's no sovereign authority, there's no lawmaking authority, government has not yet emerged. But I see somebody violate the law of nature. Let's say I see somebody harm somebody else physically. Then it's up to me to enforce the law of nature, to make sure that the criminal is punished. Imagine that we're all on some desert island, plane crash, whatever, boat shipwrecked, and we're trying to live together, and one of us murders another one. Locke would say, well, clearly, the people who are left alive have the right and the obligation to punish the murderer, right? There's no law in terms of a government of that island, but there is a law of nature that person is violated by committing murder. It's this kind of thing he's talking about, I think, which is, I don't know, it seems to be quite reasonable. So we get a very different picture of the state of nature, and very different picture, from Hobbes.